We are live.
Do you want to cook? Well, good evening, uh, America. Sorry for
I'm
the
sorry, honey.
extreme
I have a
long
6 hour.
wait, but I will take this time to
Live.
welcome everyone to the first mock election presidential debate for season 26. We are live from Cobo Center in Detroit, Michigan. I'd like to thank the hosting venue for hosting this, and as well as MEC C-SPAN for
Good
broadcasting this
evening.
debate. The moderators for this debate are myself, His Majesty Kenneth Quinones, and Vice President Raimundo Felix. The rules are simple. Each candidate gets 1 minute and 30 seconds for both opening and closing statements. 1 minute and 30 seconds to que- um, for each time to answer the question, and 30 seconds for rebuttals. We ask the audience to hold applause to a minimum as we are limited on time. If you run over your time, you will be interrupted by the moderator. If you interrupt your fellow debaters, your time will be cut by 15 seconds. Now I introduce to you moderator
Okay,
Raimundo
now let's
Felix.
introduce. Okay, now I can introduce the candidates. The candidates are former District 4 Senator Ben Mackay and former President of the United States Robert Sanders.
And current senator.
Both have. Oh, well, I said former President of the United States, but okay. Um, okay, the order has been decided by the website called random.org using the tool called List Randomizer. Former Senator Ben Mackay will be going first, and former President Robert Sanders will be going second. The order will be changed throughout the debate. However, there will be a change between questions. For example, candidate A shall speak first, then second, then last. That means we'll hear an opening statement from former Senator Ben McKay, then the answer to the first question from President Sanders, and so on. And now we'll go with the opening statements, where former Senator Ben McKay will go first.
Well, thank you.
You have 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, good very late evening to uh, Senator Sanders, to our moderators. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank you all for staying up to listen or listening to this tomorrow. That's very understandable at this hour. Um, it is crucial to address the issues that are plaguing voters. So I want to thank you guys for being here so we can help voters get to the bottom of these issues. I also want to thank everyone who's helped me get to this point in this campaign. It's been a lot of hard work, and there's going to be hard work ahead, but I'm looking forward to it. My name is Ben Mackay. I am a former representative for District 9 in the House, and I'm a former senator for District 4. Over the past few weeks, I've been traveling across our great nation, and I've been meeting with its people and asking them about their concerns and beliefs. They have continually expressed their dissatisfaction with the status quo. Although I consider Robert Sanders a friend, I don't think that he is the man to lead us at this time. Our community is at a pivotal point right now. We have a chance to bring about real change. I've dedicated my entire political life towards making the lives of the American people better, from working on the RTA, the Rapid Transport Act, to the Baby Bonds Act, to the 21st Century Education Reform, to the Puerto Rico Statehood Act, to the ERA. I've always put the needs of other people first. This is what I believe we need in a president. We need dedication. In conclusion, I believe that America is best when America works for everyone. So I want to do my best to ensure that America gets a fresh vision, a fresh voice, and most importantly, fresh hope. Thank you, and I hope I get your support.
Now, former President Robert Sanders, your opening statement.
Well, thank you, Raimundo, and thank you, Kenneth and Ben, for being here tonight. Thank you for those who are listening to this, or listening to it live, or tomorrow or another day. Uh, this campaign is about fundamentally changing MEC. I bring to the table many policies and reforms that will change the way this country and this community operates. These reforms include an outline budget law to make it clearer when to pass a budget and when we are in a shutdown, a detailed governor's plan that we can achieve by lobbying the mods and creating public outcry for this particular law. And as president, I would be able to facilitate that through uh, means of uh, you know, public outcries and stuff. Uh, Electoral reform in the form of ranked choice voting and some other quality of life changes, lobbying the mods for more autonomy and giving elected bodies of government more power in deciding what goes on within the community, passing a referendum law that deals with how to pass a referendum, what can be in a referendum, and how to conduct it, so the people of this community have more of a voice in decisions made. We're going to be overall boosting engagement, making things exciting. These are the reasons why this community has declined. Things haven't been exciting. Things haven't been engaging. There haven't been news posts and events. These powers of change are powers that we don't believe our presidents to have. But if our presidents are willing and able to do it, then they can make this change. My opponent is a good person. He brings some ideas to the table. But at the end of the day, we need someone who will go far beyond incremental change. Someone who will really change this community and the way it works. I have done that in the past. I have done that in the House, the Senate, as president. I'm offering that change, and I hope tonight to be able to convince you to be able to join this movement and fundamentally change the way MEC operates. We have an opportunity to bring this community into a new era of activity, a new era of events and special news alts, a new era of ownership and leadership. This is what we need to be doing to effectively run this community into what we will soon know as to be the future of MEC. I am the person ready to do this job. I hope I can earn your support, and thank you all for joining us tonight.
Thank you. The first question will be asked by moderator Raimundo Felix.
Okay, so we're going to be opening with the topic of foreign affairs and national security. So my first question is for President Sanders, former President Sanders. So you have served in the office of the presidency, but many people question your ability to continue American traditions on the stance of terrorism and negotiating with terrorists. So your acting Secretary of Defense confirmed, along with former FBI Director Roman Thaddeus, they agreed that you indeed negotiated with terrorists, specifically in the situation in Turkey. Many congressional leaders and members from this community were against such action. So how can you defend your actions, and how do you respond to those members of your cabinet who disapproved of your approach on the situation?
Well, I think everyone that disapproves with my approach or criticizes my approach simply just doesn't fully understand what we did in the Situation Room to be able to not only save every hostage in that situation, but kill every single one of the terrorist militants in that operation. What I did to quote unquote negotiate with these militants was to work with them to get them on the asphalt of the runway of the nearest airport so we could have the spec ops that were waiting outside of the airport ready to engage at a moment's notice. The only negotiating that went on was the negotiating to get them on the asphalt in sight for our brave men and women in the special ops team to be able to uh, engage and ruin their day and cut them down. So I don't. It was negotiating to kill them. It was fake negotiations. It was to mislead them into walking into their own deaths. So that it wasn't real negotiation is what I have to say to that.
I'd like a rebuttal. Or am I going to get that question as well?
Well, actually, I was going to ask a follow-up question. No, I wanted to
What is
ask
it,
a
sorry?
follow-up question to Robert.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
I wanted to ask a follow-up question too. Okay, so let me just understand the logic of what you said. So the militants stated they would release all hostages if all ground troops were pulled out of Syria and if the U.S. relationship with Israel was reduced. Then you agreed to those terms only to say that you did not negotiate with the terrorists in Syria. Is this correct?
I think you cut off on the last bit. Can you say it again?
Okay, I'll just repeat it again. So, the militants stated that they would release all hostages if all ground troops were pulled out of Syria and if the U.S. relationship with Israel was reduced. Then you agreed to those terms, well, one of those terms, to say that you did not negotiate with the terrorists, but this event simply sped up your agenda in Syria. Is this correct?
That is correct. I did say that we made the choice to leave Syria at an earlier point in the administration than what we had planned out when we first had been inaugurated on Inauguration Day. So, I mean, it did, in a way, accelerate our plans to evacuate Syria and move all 2,000 troops out of Syria. But at the end of the day, our relationship with Israel remains the same. Syria is in a better position now than ever. All Turkish militants are dead, and every single one of the American hostages in that situation is alive. And I think that's what really matters at the end of the day in the situation. Not that I negotiated with terrorists in order to get them on an asphalt, in order to get them on the tarmac to be able to engage and kill every single one of them. So I think that's the important thing, and that's what we have to focus on here.
Can
Okay,
I?
so I have one more follow-up question, and then and then you can say your Ben.
Okay,
Okay,
thank
so
you.
my question is that many people are additionally arguing that a pullout of Syria could not be properly done in 7 days. What is your response to this claim?
Well, it's false. We got it done. The moderators confirmed
Mm.
we did it in a efficient and effective way. It was done where the security and safety of all troops were met to an adequate standard. Every troop came home unharmed. Um, well, every troop that was in there at the time
Fact check.
came
I'd like a fact check.
home unharmed.
I'd like a fact
If
check on that. 3 American soldiers were killed.
that
I'd like a fact check on that, please.
wasn't in Syria. Those three Americans were brave soldiers that died in the line of fire, killing every single terrorist in the Spec Ops mission, not leaving Syria. Um, the Spec Op
I'm.
mission wasn't in Syria whatsoever at all. Uh, so
I understand that.
that's your fact check.
I think you misstated what you said, but anyways, go ahead. I apologize for interrupting.
Well, I mean, I said what I had to say.
Okay, so now Ben, if you still want to rebuttal, you can do
Yes,
so now.
yes, I would
30
very
seconds.
much like to. I apologize for interrupting if I misunderstood what you said, but there's a lot to unpack there. So I apologize if I missed something. Frankly, I like Mr. Sanders, I really do, but he showed a lack of leadership in this situation. Okay, here's the thing with what happened in Turkey. You know, as much as I respect him, his record on the issue of terrorism isn't a good one. As president, he overseen the hostage negotiations with terrorists. He just said it himself at the start of his
And we
statement.
killed them all.
He said at the start. Excuse me. At the start of his statement, he said that he did not negotiate with terrorists, and then by the end of it, he said we negotiated with them to get them on the asphalt. So which was it? That would be my first thing I'd like to say. Secondly, yeah, he tried to cut a deal with these terrorists by sending his acting Secretary of Defense to Turkey to try and, quote, resolve the situation. That is exactly what was said. That is the exact verbatim quote from the White House, to resolve the situation. And not only did that attempt fail, but you then sent a team to rescue these hostages, which resulted in the tragic deaths of 3 Americans. So to say, first off, that every American or every American hostage returns home safely is a very big mischaracterization of what happened. So to recap, you tried to cut a deal with these terrorists in Turkey. You lied about it by saying you didn't negotiate with them, despite sending the Secretary of Defense to resolve the situation. It failed, and then you tried to get a deal with them, and it ended up uh, it it ended up killing 3 Americans. So I mean, at the end of the day, this is the kind of failed foreign policy that has gotten us into the situation that we are in right now.
Well, let me respond to that with some really quick points. Uh, Suggesting that there was another option for me to use that wouldn't have resulted in the deaths of some of the members of the Spec Ops team is wrong. You can ask Roman Thaddeus. He himself said that there was no operation that the administration could have gone through with that wouldn't have resulted in the deaths of at least or of 3 or more American soldiers in the special ops team. The special ops team knew what they were doing when they were going in. They knew the risks, and ultimately, you can ask Roman for a fact check. Ultimately, the plan that we went through was the safest plan for not only the spec ops team, but for the hostages, because the hostages and the spec ops team and the battle between the spec ops team and the terrorists would be separated from the hostages. So it was the most effective way to keep the hostages safe, kill all the terrorists as we could, and have as minimal casualties as we could with the spec ops team. That's a part of the work that we have to do in the situation room. You have to make those tough decisions, and as president, even if you were in that situation, you couldn't have saved every single member of the spec ops team. It wouldn't have been possible. The acting secretary of defense Lee went to Turkey not to meet with the terrorists, but to meet with the Turkish ambassador, or the U.S. Turkish ambassador who was outside of the building in the hostage situation. And again, you can ask Roman. uh, every operation the administration would have gone through would have led to the deaths of at least 3 members in the Spec Ops team, and the mission that we went through was the safest one uh, to go through with for the safety of the hostages and the administration. So it, 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 that is what true leadership is: taking those hard decisions and turning them into real results, and the result of which was the 15 hostages being saved, which was the goal of the mission. And I think if those 3 soldiers were here today, you could ask them, and they would say that they were proud of the work they did on that day. And diminishing their work by saying that they were sent in the line of battle in vain is just
Okay. Um,
really
I
disrespectful to them and their
okay.
families.
That was a wild mischaracterization of what I just said. That had nothing to do with what I just said. That was the biggest tangent I've ever heard. I'll be very brief. Um, Firstly, I never said that. Um, Listen, I'm not saying that it was the wrong call to send that team in to get those hostages
That's
out. That
exactly
was
what you
not.
said.
That is. I'd like a record check on that first off, so you guys can go back and check the tape on it. But that is not what I said. And if I did, I misspoke, because that obviously there's no other way. You have to get the terrorists out, or you have to get the hostages out. Excuse me. But here's the situation. You mischaracterized what you said at the start. You didn't mention those 3 soldiers who died on that day. You said that every American got home safely, and that was
Every
a
American.
mischaracterization. And that is why. No, I know you clarified it afterwards and said hostages, but at the start, that is why I brought this up. That you said Americans, and that is why I called you out on that, because that is not. Uh, Even if you did say hostage, you didn't make mention of the 3 Americans who died that day. Anyways,
Okay,
I
well,
know that my time is up here and my 2 rebuttals are done. So, yes,
I
but
think we can check the tape, but I think you were mixing up what I said both times.
We're moving on.
No, let me just respond to this. I think you were mixing up what I said both times. I said that every American in Syria was pulled out safely. No Americans died.
No, I understand what you said.
No.
No.
Let me finish. Let me finish. I don't interrupt you. Every American who was pulled out of Syria didn't die, and I acknowledge every single time that all hostages were saved, and that all 15 hostages were saved. All 15 terrorists were killed, and yes, 3 brave young men were killed in the line of duty in a special ops mission that they knew had a serious risk of resulting in casualty, and we knew as well.
Robert, I don't know why you're saying. I'm not blaming you for the 3 deaths of these people. I'm saying this. This is what I'm saying. You started out by saying that all hostages got home safe. Well, at the start you said Americans, but let's even just overlook that. You said that all hostages got home safely and that all terrorists were killed, which is true. But you didn't bring up the 3 Americans who died. So it's not a complete success. To say that that was an overwhelming success, that mission is
Okay,
just
we'd like to move on
I
a
to the next question.
mischaracterization. That's all I wanted to point out.
We are moving
I
on.
didn't
We
say
are
it was
moving
an
on.
overwhelming success, and I
Okay.
always acknowledged the 3 men who died of that day.
But you did.
Okay,
Anyways.
we're moving on to the next question.
Move on to the next question.
Okay. So my next question is for former Senator Mackay. So the UN High Commission for Human Rights report on Venezuela was published a couple months ago, and based on research conducted from January 2018 to May 2019, the report, direct quote, this is a direct quote from the report. It says high violations directly and indirectly affecting all human rights. It offers a list of recommendations that the Venezuelan government should act on immediately. So, if president, what is your approach to the current humanitarian and geopolitical crisis we face in Venezuela, and how do you plan to solve it?
Sorry, I don't know what happened there at the end. I think I got. Can you just repeat that last part of it?
Okay.
Just the question.
So the report offers a list of recommendations that the Venezuelan government should act on immediately. What is your approach to the current humanitarian and geopolitical crisis we face in Venezuela, and how do you plan to solve it?
Yeah. So that's a very good question. So the crisis in Venezuela, we have to look first off at what these kinds of things stem from. We can trace it all the way back to the North and South divide. So if you don't know what that is, basically colonial nations, controlled or had a large economic impact over more southern nations. And I think that should be pointed out as well, that countries like Venezuela, and not to talk about what's happening now, this is just to give context, countries in the South haven't always been given proper opportunities. It's not like America is doing this kind of stuff. It's a country that hasn't been given as much opportunities as other nations. Obviously, they have a very different ideology from us. However, we have to be willing to go and try and look out for the best interest of the people that are there. Because at the end of the day, you see some of these pictures of children there starving. It's a famine. There's no other way to say it. It's getting to the point where this government is trying to deprive its citizens of the proper necessities that any decent human being in general deserves. And you see some of these pictures, if they were in black and white, you might not be able to tell the difference between someone in a concentration camp. So we need to stand up and voice our condemnation of what is going on in Venezuela 100%. But here's the thing. I don't think that the proper action on this thing is just to impose sanctions on, just throw sanctions at Venezuela, because at the end of the day, um, that is just going to make a worse, uh, a bad situation get that much worse by making sure that people who need food, who need help from leaders like the United States, don't get it. Excuse me. And at the end of the day, America will always stand up for people around the world who are facing oppression, uh, especially in nations like Venezuela, where they don't have a choice. Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to move on to my questions. This
Wait,
one
I don't
goes
get to answer the
to
Venezuela question?
no. Moving on. This question goes to Robert Sanders. Um, President Sanders, people question your foreign policy approach on China. You were uh, you were committed on a stronger foreign policy against the Chinese. When China interfered within the election in Madagascar, both the British and the Canadians called for you to take action. You've allowed the Chinese to meddle in the election when the people of Madagascar called for the United States and Western powers to help them from the arising communist organizations. How can you explain to the American people that you are for a more democratic agenda, better foreign policy, yet the event that occurred in Madagascar with the Chinese meddling, you have done little to nothing to hold the Chinese accountable, but just release a statement?
That's actually not true. We've working with Secretary of the Treasury Ethan Fitzgerald, we were able to work on legislation to not only counteract China's efforts in Africa, but also to bring forward environmental protections into our trade legislation. And we also did work like that while working with uh, Senator Terry, or former Representative or Trade Representative Terry, um, current senator, who worked on the NAFTA renegotiation. We were able to get those environmental protections and China counteractions in. But as in regards to the Madagascar situation, uh, using hindsight, I would have put in a UN peace force, but I think that the response that the Sanders administration had uh, was not. It wasn't a public one, but the private response that we had when uh, we were monitoring the situation in Madagascar was, let's keep our eye on the situation. Let's make sure that it doesn't get violent. It didn't. Let's make sure that um, there's no uh, domino effect with Madagascar, because sometimes in situations like this, you can have rising revolutions in other nations as a result of a revolution in one. But at the end of the day, what we felt was that the people have the opportunity to make their decision in Madagascar. And again, hindsight would have put a UN peace force in there. Um, People's rights were protected in Madagascar, and uh, the changing of government did not fundamentally change the way that Madagascar operates. It did not uh, impose greater authoritarianism on its people. It did not do anything quite negative other than a change of government. And I think that my response in monitoring the situation, speaking with former Secretary of Events Roman Thaddeus at the time, um, was adequate enough. And I think the post was adequate enough. And again, in hindsight, we would have put in Peace Force in, but it's not like some big thing happened in Madagascar that was the result of a failure of the Sanders administration. It just simply wasn't
Well,
American. Let me finish for a second. It just simply wasn't American interventionism into Madagascar in response to them changing their democratically elected government.
so just as just a follow-up question, what specifically have you done to counterattack the Chinese when you've heard about the news of them meddling in the election in Madagascar?
Well, again, as I stated in the beginning, the Secretary of the Treasury and I, alongside with the trade rep at the time, Mr. Terry, worked on trade negotiations and African investments to counteract China's efforts on the One
But it
Belt
was
Road
never
project.
finished.
It was finished. You can ask Secretary
No, it
Fitzgerald.
wasn't, because I can actually fact check that. You were actually, the Secretary Ethan Fitzgerald was actually working with the British when I was Prime Minister at the time. And I asked for you to cooperate with us due to the times where uh,
You
a
might.
lawmaker was shot, and I asked you to continue working on this trade deal to counterattack the Chinese, but you refused, and the trade deal was never done. So nothing was
That's
done against the Chinese.
that's not the story. If you want to talk about the time when you were British Prime Minister, we could talk about the
No,
time you shut
I'm
down
talking
diplomatic
about
actions with the
I.
United
Can I
States.
have a rebuttal,
Uh,
please?
excuse me, no, this is not funny.
But
You said,
what we
you
did.
stated, you, excuse me, no, I'm asking questions here. You stated that you took actions, counter attack, attacks against the Chinese, and you didn't because
No,
nothing
no, no.
was done.
You can go back on the tape. I said we were working on counteraction.
No, you said that you completed
No, that's not
and
what
that
I
you've
said.
done.
But
All right, so okay, so I'm basically a liar here. All right then.
Can I have a rebuttal, please?
Yeah, sure. 30 seconds, please.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this is just respectfully another example of Senator Sanders' lack of leadership here. You know, some people blame him for, or you group him in with QJ with the thing that happened in the South China Sea. I personally don't. I don't. He voiced his opinion. I respect that. But there's no excuse for what happened in Madagascar. You know, he says that it wasn't a big thing or whatever. It is. It was a big thing. China interfered in democratic elections in Madagascar. Uh, the Madagascar, the people of Madagascar didn't get to make a decision, Senator Sanders. It was a sham election. Uh, you released a statement. You didn't put any sanctions. I commend you for the statement, but you didn't put any sanctions on. You didn't send in a Peace Corps, as you said that you regret doing. So I respect that. We'll give you a pass on that. And but here's the thing: despite our UK and our Canadian allies trying to push for additional pressure, we didn't. We cannot afford to let electoral democracies fall into the abyss because of a president who's afraid to act, and that won't
afraid.
happen when I'm president.
Okay, well, it's a lot to unpack there. I wasn't afraid to do anything. Um, what we did, and what I meant by it wasn't a big deal, is there was no violent overthrow. There's been no negative outcome of that election. We've seen no news coming out of Madagascar, and Madagascar has in no way fundamentally changed. If there was some big thing happening in Madagascar due to China's meddling efforts, then there would be a news post about it. There would be some uh, response to what has happened, but there hasn't been, and there hasn't been for the past 8 years. Now, back to the point, uh, you could even question the amount that China even meddled in Madagascar's election. No one has brought up an exact amount. Not even Roman, when he posted the thing, brought up an exact amount of, or an estimate of how much China actually meddled in Madagascar's election. Once we know that, once we know the actual facts, if those want to be brought up, once we know to the degree of which China had influence in Madagascar, and if it was 100%, then you could say then it was a failure. But at the end of the day, with no real change happening to Madagascar as a result of this, um, other than a couple of protests for a day or two, no protests for the past 8 years. Then that would be more justified. But I think calling what had happened a failure, a simple foreign policy blunder of not bringing peace troops in, you can't call that a failure. It's not a failure. And I also would say that I wouldn't have put sanctions on Madagascar, and I don't know if that's what you were implying, but that's yeah, I wouldn't have put sanctions on Madagascar as precedent. So
Okay, I'll be very brief. Just a few things. First off, that's not what I was implying, but anything would have been better than doing nothing. Just to say that just because there was no specific change or that you can point to or put a pin in doesn't mean that uh, it was nothing or wasn't a big thing. China
the
now
degree
has
of which China,
control. Excuse me. Thank you. China now has control over Madagascar. They have them under their thumb. You
that's
cannot, excuse me, you cannot just say that, oh, well, we don't know how much China interfered in this election or Madagascar's people,
but we
uh,
don't.
or Madagascar's people made a decision. We know that they interfered in that election. Roma wouldn't have made an event about it if they hadn't have. That's just the sad reality of the situation. And I'm sorry, Robert, but you failed to address that situation. And we cannot afford to let another country fall into the clutches of the Chinese right now at this pivotal point. The Chinese are probably going to be, or not probably, they are going to be our greatest economic threat going forward, possibly even our greatest geopolitical threat going forward. And to say that it's not a big deal that they fell into that Madagascar fell into the hands of China, that's just a simple. It just shows, frankly, incompetence on your former administration's part.
Okay. Well, I didn't say it wasn't a big deal if Madagascar had fallen into China's hands, but I'll say it again. The degree of which China meddled in the election of Madagascar matters because huge geopolitical powers like the United States, like Russia, like Great Britain, like France, like Germany, like China, all meddle in other nations' elections. It happens. It's something that we rolled back, and the Evans administration rolled back as president in the United States' efforts to meddle in other countries' elections, and we will continue to do so if elected again. But it's something that you have to realize and recognize happens all the time in every election in almost every other democratically elected country on Earth. The degree of which China meddled in the election in Madagascar matters, and the fact that we don't know how much they did is a very valid point. It is a very valid point of contention when you say that it was a complete failure. When you say that Madagascar was um, or is completely controlled by the Chinese government, I don't think that the Madagascar or the people of Madagascar feel that they are under the control of the Chinese government, and I think that the current government of Madagascar does not feel that they are under the influence of the Chinese government. I'd say that uh, Madagascar's relationship with China as it stands currently is better than it was before because of Chinese investment in Madagascar. And what we must do as a country is counteract that by investing our own money and our own funds into Madagascar. And uh, you just simply
So why
cannot.
didn't we do that? Why didn't we do that?
Oh,
Well,
okay.
you'd have to ask
We're
Secretary
gonna.
Fitzgerald.
Well,
That
we'd
was
have
his
to ask
project.
you, wouldn't we?
No,
Because
you
you were
wouldn't.
president
You'd
of the
have to
United
ask
States
Secretary
Okay,
right now.
okay.
Fitzgerald. It was his project.
No, no, no.
Shame.
Excuse me.
Shame.
We're just gonna ask one more follow
Shame.
up, and
You're shaming me for the
mm,
work of someone else because you think that every piece of legislation in my administration has to be worked on by me.
That's not what I said.
Cabinet
But
members work
could
on
you?
legislation, and
Of course, I'm not. That's not what I said.
and I,
That's not in any way
you
what I
said
said.
shame for me
I
not
did.
for not
Yes,
for not
because you
passing.
should have. Because you were the president of the United States. The buck stops in the Oval Office.
Okay. Well,
You can't just say what was he just going to go ahead without your directive to go ahead and write this up, and then you say, you know what, actually I don't
no,
agree with that, and veto it.
I gave him my directive,
Give me a
and
break.
he did not complete.
okay. Excuse me.
Well, then
Excuse me.
that's your fault
That
Okay.
happens in
for
every administration.
Okay.
And
No.
you're,
Excuse me.
we've spent the past 20 minutes
Ex-
on the faults of
okay.
my past administration. I
15
think what the
seconds will
American
be
people want to hear is
deducted.
a real platform and policy for our future of this community.
15 seconds will be deducted.
I understand that the attacks brought up on me are important, and I think the criticisms brought up on my past administration are important. But it's also important to talk about the real issues. And we've spent the past
30
30 minutes
seconds.
on these topics, and Mr. McKay and I have not had our chance to bring up the policy that we want to implement in our next administration, and that, at the end of the day, is the most important thing that the American people will be deciding this election on. So
Okay.
I hope and urge that we move on from these criticism questions, because they are ridiculous and get the American people and the conversation for this election going nowhere.
Okay. Thank you.
Fair enough.
So this is a follow-up question to the president, and this will be a yes
Oh
or
my
no.
God.
Do you? This is just a yes or no, and we'll move on. Do you wish that you could have called for an international investigation against the Chinese when they meddled in the election in Madagascar? Yes or no?
Do I wish that I could have? Is that what you said?
Did you wish that you? Yes, that at the time.
Well, I'm gonna interpret that as you meant I should say, do I wish I should have, um, or do I
Hmm.
think I should have? Yeah, I guess I think I do. Um, uh, it's a complicated
Uh,
subject, creating an international investigation. Again, I think uh, we would have to determine the degree of which China influenced and meddled in the election, and I think that would be a good way to get to that
okay.
goal.
Thank you,
Now, again, let's
Mr.
move on to policy
President.
questions, please. This is just
Yes.
ridiculous.
Senator McKay, if you were president at the time of a global recession, what specifically what would you have done to tackle the global economic challenges and work with America's oldest allies to get a deal and approve a comprehensive trade agreement?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Um, so we've seen in the past, um, presidents who have gone through very important situations like that, whether it be FDR, Hoover, Obama, etc., who have had a recession of some size on their hands. Um, as president, the first thing I would do if we were caught in a recession would be assemble the cabinet. It's important to keep them updated, and it's important to let them know what our objectives are going to be going forward. I would also try and assemble uh, the Congress to let them know, because in the past, I know as a person who served in the United States Congress, in both chambers, it's kind of frustrating. It seems sometimes like it's like pulling teeth when you're trying to get information from the executive, um, and it's been like that under multiple presidents. So I would do those things first. Um, Secondly, I would try and work on a stimulus package uh, to try and make sure that we could get our economy back on its feet. And furthermore, I would start contacting our international allies in the United Kingdom and in Canada. The connections that I've built there, I think, would definitely help me uh, with a situation like that if I needed to get international consensus on a trade agreement. I would definitely work on trying to contact the UK Prime Minister, the Canadian Prime Minister, and any other international world leaders that I could get a hold of at the time. I think that it's crucial to understand that our economy isn't a game that can be fiddled with by big business and billionaires. It's something that needs to be taken seriously. We have senior citizens and people who are working their way through the workforce who have invested money into their pensions and you know put money away for retirement, that if the economy goes south uh, drastically, it can all impact that, whether it be that, or it could be a high school student going up and trying to get into university and trying to pay off student loan debt, or trying to make up a plan for how they're going to pay it if they haven't started school already. And I think that a lot of us in Mac understand that, as we're most either getting ready to go off to university soon, or we're in it now, or we're planning or thinking about it a little bit if we're a little bit younger. But I think that it's crucial to understand that if we let recession just fester, or let the system work itself out, then we are going to have a very big problem on our hands. And we've seen this kind of mentality around the world, that the system is too big to fail. The system is not too big to fail. We can see in it, just looking back throughout history, that we've seen people, or not people, we've seen the economy come down like a ton of bricks and land on middle class families. And as president, I'm going to work my ass off to ensure that that doesn't happen.
Okay. Thank you, Raimundo.
Okay, now I'm asking questions again.
Yeah.
So the my question is to former President Sanders. So the most widely reported negative impact from increasing the minimum wage is an expected increase in unemployment. This is derived by the classic economic theory as early as in the 1970s, and it is greatly supported by empirical research. How do you see the issue of minimum wage, and what would you do about it if you get elected as president?
Well, I think the issue of minimum wage is an important one, and the fact that we've already passed legislation to move us up to $15 an hour is a step in the right direction. I would tie that to inflation to ensure that the minimum wage continuously rises and we don't get ourselves into a situation where we go 30 years without an effective minimum wage rise, where workers are left to uh, work for themselves and survive on their own without um, that social safety net that we need in place to ensure that the free market doesn't create a huge pool of poverty with the wealth pooling at the top. And the idea that the minimum wage somehow raises unemployment is simply wrong. Seattle is the prime example of this. They have moved their minimum wage to $15 an hour, and unemployment has actually gone down. And just to address what Kenneth's question is, because I think it's a little ridiculous, I'm not getting these questions. I think um, it's kind of a bad question to assume that we're going to get into a recession. We don't need to be in a recession, and we can put economic policies in place, like labor rights, like workplace democracy, to ensure that, and like Wall Street transactional reforms, to ensure that we don't go into a recession. We can be like Australia and go 27 years without having a recession. This is achievable, and I think we have to break this mentality of it's inevitable we're going to get into a recession. And as president, I will pass economic reforms and expand on economic reforms passed by President Evans, such as using the Wall Street transactional tax revenue to go into a college for all fund, passing workplace democracy and co-determination to put at least 40% workers on corporate boards, and other major labor legislation to ensure that not only are our workers protected, but our economy is protected, our small businesses, our local economies are protected, and so that the middleman is protected. I bring real policies and solutions to this, not platitudes and nice word salad stories. So I just answered two questions in one, and I hope both answers are satisfactory. That's my time.
I'll be very brief in this. I just want to just say something. I agree with most of what Senator Sanders said there. Of course, we don't want to think about us getting into a recession, but that assertion is just ridiculous, frankly. It's of course we don't want to have to think about that, but at the end of the day, it's thinking like that we're not going to get into a recession that causes us to get into trouble when something goes south. obviously we're going to do whatever we can, whoever is president, regardless if it's me or you or whoever, to ensure that we're not going to have a recession on our hands. I don't think anybody is rooting for a recession. And obviously, it's not something that we want to think about. But here's the hard reality, Mr. Sanders. There are people in the middle class who constantly have to think about a recession. People in the lower class who have to constantly think about a recession because it could wipe out their savings. And so to think that let's just ignore that, this shouldn't even be a question in the debate, I don't think is a proper way to think about such an important issue. Um, we need to actually think about who we want at the helm if something like that happened. Do we want somebody with a steady hand and proven leadership, or do we want somebody who says, you know what, we don't even got to think about it?
Okay, well, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be thinking or considering the fact that a recession could be happening. I'm not saying we should ignore a huge part of economics and economic theories. Uh, what I'm saying is we need to change the framing of the question. Instead of asking the question from the perspective of it's inevitable we're going to have a recession, the question should be something along the lines of what economic policies are you going to put in place to avoid a recession and to ensure that our economy is stabilized over a long-term period. That's the questions should be asking, and that's how we change the mentality of the people to not think about a recession is going to happen. It's just a matter of when. But um, to so people think about policy in the way of, um, you know, we're going to implement this. It's going to affect it this way, and it's going to help us avoid this particular issue. And that's what I did with my answer. I'm not saying we should not think about recessions, and that's a complete gross mischaracterization of what my policy is. And yeah, that was absolutely ridiculous.
No, I understand what you're saying. I'm not arguing. I'm not even arguing with what your point was. I'm just saying that you know his question to me was, if you're in charge, if you're president, and a recession hits, what are you going to do? You know,
Right, and that's what I'm.
like
That's like.
this is the
But
thing.
you just
That's
said
not
you
an,
agree with my
that's
point.
not. No,
That's
no.
that
I
is
I
that
agree
the
with a
framing
part of
of
your
that
point.
question is
Okay,
we're
excuse
gonna
me.
have an
Can I?
inevitable
I
recession, and
didn't
that's
interrupt
just
you
simply what's
respectfully.
going on.
Respectfully, Senator, I did not interrupt you, and I'd like to get my point across because I don't have that much time to rebut. Thank you. Um, what I was saying was, his question was if it's a hypothetical question. It's something that we need to think about. If if this happens, who do we want at the helm, and what are you going to do if this happens? It's not he didn't say when a recession hits and you're in office. He said if. So that was my point. So respectfully, I think you just misunderstood what he was asking there. But anyways, regardless, I take your point at face value there, and yes.
Yeah, no, all I was saying is, and what the facts are, is the framing of the questions is we will inevitably have a recession. We have to break that mentality. I already outlined what the question should be, what my economic policies will be to avoid a recession, and what I do as president to ensure that that doesn't happen.
Okay, so the next question is for former Senator Mackay. So Mexic's economy had its ups and downs, but so far it seems to be in good health. However, under the Bush 41 presidency, despite decent headline growth, median wages for those in the middle and lower classes were barely changed. What will you do if elected president to ensure that the rewards from growth actually benefit most people?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. That's a very important one on the issue of the economy. Economic security is something that it's on the minds of many Americans at many times. A lot of Americans, like I said, are concerned when a bill comes in the mail that they're going to have to make a heart-wrenching decision between paying the bill or paying the fee for their child's sports equipment. I think that this is something that isn't really thought about in Washington, D.C. You think about the economy and you think, okay, we want a healthy economy, but why do we want this healthy economy? What are going to be the impacts of a negative trending economy on everyday Americans? So, what I will do is I will fight for those people across our country and defend them by one, ensuring that our minimum wage is steady and it's not fluctuating every time a congressperson introduces a bill, because I understand that, yes, in theory, it's good to give people more money, but at the end of the day, one, we have to tie it to inflation, and so there's that risk. And then two, if it's unsteady, we're running other risks with our economy as well. If we're having a battle between people on one side of the aisle and people on the other, between somebody passes a bill to raise it, somebody passes another one to lower it, etc. Um, the other thing I'd do, I'd cap ATM fees at 50 cents. I think that that's something that's important. I think that uh, President Adam Evans, he's brought that up in the past, and I completely agree. I think that it's something that's important, that needs to be addressed. And the third thing I would do, I would expand the Baby Bonds Act. I would lower the secondary requirements of the bill, because at the time when I passed it, excuse me, it was a $30,000 threshold, and I think that that can be lowered to include more people, to make sure that more people can give their children an affordable education.
I need to add on to Mr. Mackay's statement very briefly.
Yep.
It wasn't already informed to you. Currently in MEC, we have capped ATM fees at 50 cents. I would know because I authored it.
Okay, well, I wasn't aware of that legislation. Anyways, regardless, I still stand by the other points, but thank you for informing me of that. I haven't been in Congress in a little while, so
Yeah.
thank you.
I was just pointing it out.
Adam, the next question.
The next question. The government has currently been in shutdown for going on 21 days now due to the expiration of the Diaz-Fitzgerald budget. What is your strategy, and how much of a priority would you make it to address the government shutdown and the growing concern that this might detract investors and hurt economic growth?
Well, thank you, Owner Evans, Farmer President Evans, for that question. Well, I'm already taking on this issue. Representative Adams, Senator Terry, and I are working on a preliminary budget that we will be expecting to put up to the budget committee by either Monday or, Monday morning or late Monday night. This budget will include many changes, such as an increase in the state budget and a decrease in the military budget to ensure that the State Department has the funds necessary to be able to use diplomacy over war, and ensure that uh, our national interests are kept throughout the world. We'll be decreasing the defense budget because we don't need to be spending $600 billion or $500 billion, excuse me, every year on weapons of war when we have the tools in a when we would have the tools in a fully defunded State Department to be able to um, use diplomacy to make the same actions we would have with a uh, peace from strength kind of mentality through our foreign policy. Um, but what else I would do to address this issue is come up with a come up with legislation to ensure that there is a process for how budgets are handled in mock election. There's no real rules for how budgets are supposed to be handled. I think we need to pass a rule where we have a timeline of how budgets should be, or when budgets, excuse me, should be passed. when we would be in a shutdown, and how often budgets would have to be passed. This kind of law, putting a rule up in both chambers of Congress, would not only alert members of Congress when the budget is in a shutdown, because most members of Congress were unaware, which is crazy to think about that we weren't in a shutdown. But it would also alert the community that we're in a shutdown, make it more of a deal, make it more engaging, and make budget talks and budgetary discussions not only something more that's regarded as something more important in the community, but something that truly is something more important in the community. And I think that not only the legislation that I'll be putting forth with the budget outline, but the budget we'll be putting forth late Monday will be uh, the stepping stone we would need to move forward as it regards to the budget.
Um, I'd just like to comment on that as well. I completely agree with what the senator was saying there. I think, and by the way, I applaud um, the congressman for working on such an important issue right now facing us. I think especially in Mac, every day matters really. A lot can happen in a day, and I think 21 days, a lot can happen in that time period. Unfortunately, one of those things hasn't been a budget deal. One thing I would say as president as well that would help me in a deliberation like that would be my bipartisanship and my willingness to compromise. You can ask pretty much anybody. I like, for example. I'll just give one off the top of my head. Chase Stevens, he's a pretty good guy. And although we've had our spats in the past over issues and policy on the House floor, when he was back in the House and I was in the House, I I still have a very deep admiration and respect for him. And we got a lot of stuff done when we were both in Congress together. And I think that that's one example. And he's just one of the Congress people or former Congress people who I've worked side by side with to make sure that progress for the American people happens. And as president, that wouldn't change.
Okay. I suppose we'll go on to the other moderator's questions that have not um, been answered yet, since he's not here. Senator Mackay, this is specifically for you. You mentioned that you want to reach carbon zero emissions by 2045. How can you do this with such an ambitious agenda?
Yeah, so this is something that I don't think is tackled or talked about as much. Um, I think that, if you don't mind, I'm going to broaden this discussion a little bit. I think that first off, it needs to be understood that the first step to getting out of a hole is to stop digging. The debate on climate change uh, shouldn't be whether it's happening or what's causing it. We need to talk about what we're going to do to combat climate change. And the first thing that we need to do is set those kinds of goals. So, as president, I'd support providing companies with incentives to be more environmentally friendly, because a lot of companies like that, they are sometimes in an industry where they can't, they they might want to be more environmentally friendly, but at the end of the day, it's not fiscally possible for them without laying off people or without making serious cuts. So at the end of the day, they have to take that alternate route. But if we give them reason to follow the more safe route for really the future of mankind, I think that they'd be a lot more willing to uh, come to the table and talk about it. Um, as president, I will also, uh, here are the goals that I'm setting. This is what I want to do. I want to start to move away from fossil fuels. I want to start to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I want to, as you mentioned, aim to be 100% carbon neutral by 2045. We need to actually start working on issues like that. And here's something as well I'd like to talk about. I want to protect workers who are in transition from job to job. A lot of the time you hear people in real life, they talk about oh, so and so is trying to take all the jobs from coal miners away. Well, I live in a town that used to be a coal mining town, or coal mining village rather. So my grandfather worked in the mines all of his life. He's a World War II veteran before that. So I understand this issue. And here's the thing. My grandfather, he didn't like going down into the mines. He didn't like it at all. But at the end of the day, he had 8 kids and he had to put food on the table. So if we can provide another way to make it feasibly possible for them to get a better job and protect them while they're in that transition, I think it would be good. But to answer your question uh, with regards to the carbon neutral date that I've set, I think that anybody who knows me knows that I like to be ambitious. I think that it's important to set goals like this. And here's the thing: we have to say before we start going through how we're going to do something and how we're going to get there and what we're going to do to get there. We need to actually sit down and say, okay, this is what we want to do, and then we sit down and we go with Congress. I'm not going to sit here and this is such an ambitious goal. This is what I mean. This is a target. I'm not going to sit here and say exactly what I'm planning to do with this, because if I do that, then there's going to be Congress people coming out and saying, no, I don't want to do that. And then if I'm elected and I have to implement that, then I might not be able to. So with this, I want to consult Congress with when I go ahead at this. But this is my starting and negotiating point, and this is what I want to try and do, those goals. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, on that note,
Yes.
Robert Sanders, what is your goal for clean energy and carbon emissions?
Well, excuse me, it's very late. It's kind of tired. Um, our goal for climate is one where we are acting on more of a foreign scale. We're thinking of the big picture. We're thinking of how can we, or Sanders administration would be thinking of how can we bring every other nation together combined, because America only makes up a small percentage of the actual carbon emissions uh, that go into the atmosphere. How can we bring every country together to global climate summits to convince them to not to make the same steps that uh, we as a nation will be making, to moving towards 100% renewables by 2030 or 2045 by investing trillions of dollars into our energy sectors to ensure that not only workers are protected when they move from the fossil fuel industry to the new sustainable one, but to ensure that the transition is one that is easy and uh, protects their livelihood as an American worker. But we also have to ensure that uh, we move towards green energy in the areas where we need it, nuclear energy in the areas where it would be better. Where we may have to make sure that we audit the entire land to put the energy systems in the places where they would be most efficient. And I'm sure Mr. McKay agrees. And I agree overall with Mr. McKay's domestic plan. However, I think there is a way we could get there a little quicker. But my specific plan is to counteract China's efforts in Africa by investing in green technologies and poverty-stricken communities in these African nations to not only lift them up technologically, but ensure that they have anti-disease protection and all that good stuff. And once we do that, African nations will be more inclined to work with us on climate, work with us on moving their energy systems to 100% renewables, and we can do the same and repeat that process with southeastern nations that are reluctant to do so, and with our European allies that are reluctant to take the full step into 100% renewable energy. So bringing the world together around the common sense ideas that we all have, and ensuring that they take the same steps that we will be as a nation on the domestic front.
I just want to quickly mention, um, I'll be very brief. I know, but I just want to say I completely agree with what Senator Sanders was there. But just one thing, I just want to clarify. What was your date? What was your year that you wanted to get to 100% carbon neutral by? Was it 2030 or was it 2045?
I'm setting a time scale in between 2030 and 2045. I believe that is the period of time where we could reach 100% renewable energy.
All right, fair enough. But I just want to say, I was talking about the greatest geopolitical threat to America, or just the greatest threat to America going forward. And one of them, I believe, is China. We've talked enough about China for one debate, in my opinion. But the other one is climate change, 100%, and they're tied together in a big way. We need to work with China to reduce their impact, because America can't go in at this alone. This isn't the time for isolationism. This is the time to get on the world stage like a world leader does and be like, you know what? Here's what we're going to do. We are going to get to 100% carbon neutral by X date. You guys set your dates, and we're going to try and work together to make sure that we can all meet our international agreements and adhere to the treaties that we've signed, whether it be Kyoto or Paris or what have you, or any future other agreement that we might get onto.
Okay, moving on to the next question.
Yeah.
The next question is for former Senator Mackay. So, an important part of our society is education. So, according to a report,
I don't want to. I think I just got two questions. I'll take the question, but I just don't want to take Robert's question because I think I got the last one.
No, it
It doesn't
was
matter
Robert
to me.
and then you. And
okay.
Okay.
I don't.
I'll
It
just
doesn't
ask
matter to me. I'm
this
just.
question to you.
Fair enough. Okay. All right.
Okay. The last question that was asked was for Robert, but you made a comment. So, okay. An important part of our society is education. According to a report published by the U.S. News and World Report, among many others, who basically give the same results of the top 10 colleges and universities in the world, are American. Oxford and Cambridge in the UK. So clearly the United States has very good universities. But the biggest question and problem here is affordability of such and other universities and colleges. What is your plan to tackle sky-high college and university prices?
Well, I shouldn't have said anything because I'm very happy I got this question. No, I was one of the people in Congress who worked on the 21st Century Education Reform Act. So I worked on that as much as I possibly could, obviously, because it was right around the time I was writing exams, but I tried to contribute and I was in the calls giving my advice. But one of the main reasons I fought for the Baby Bonds Act was because of the issue of affordability on the issue of education. A 2017 report, I can't remember, this is just off the top of my head, I can't remember what site it was, but I could reference it later if you guys would like, just for clarity, showed that 95% of American colleges are too expensive for the majority of low-income earners. So before the Baby Bonds Act, that disproportionately impacted minorities, specifically African American, the African American community. So I think that it's important to put in context what I've done so far. But going forward, this is what I would do. I would expand the Baby Bonds Act, as I said earlier. I think that it's important to make sure that more people can get in on this bill and get in on the benefits that it offers. So I would lower the secondary. Requirements of it. But I think that it's important to recognize the importance of education for all Americans. This isn't something that is a Democratic or a Republican or an American Independent or a birthday party or whatever issue. This is something that we should all be behind, making sure that future generations of voters and of Americans get the proper education that they deserve. And that's why that's why I worked on the Baby Bonds Act so hard, and that's why I will expand it. But also, I'd just like to touch on something else on education. This doesn't relate directly to your question, but I'd just like to touch on it. As president, I would pass a teacher and early educator school supply tax credit. So that would be a refundable income tax credit, which will aim to accommodate for the expenses that teachers often incur in order to further the learning of students. I'm sure that we've all bared witness to a teacher that we've had in the past paying out of their own pocket to pay for something in the classroom to make sure that we could get ahead. So as president, I would pass that as well, just to touch on the issue of education. But to answer your question, yes, I think that affordability is definitely an issue on education. That's why I fought for the Baby Bonds Act, and that's why, if elected as your commander in chief, I would expand it by lowering or easing the secondary requirements of the bill. Thank you.
Okay, the next question is for former President Sanders. A former Senator Heidi Allen received criticism for her bill that repealed the heartbeat abortion bill. What is your detailed stance on the practice of abortion, and when should it be legal, if legal at all?
My principled stance on abortion is I am pro-choice, but I also, in practice, support the 20-week or the 20-week ban on abortions. Um, what we have to be doing is ensuring that women have the choice, but also that we aren't, uh, because the science is still out on whether the fetus has conscious thought or whether the fetus could really be determined a baby. We still have to take into account that the actions we could be taking could be killing another human life. And that's why I think it's a compromise between allowing women to choose, because I do believe in that, and also protecting life. I think the compromise for that is the 20-week abortion ban, and I support that. But to the education question, because I think that's an important one, and I have a huge plan for that. Quickly, we will be using the funds from the transactional tax passed by the Wall Street transactional tax passed by the Evans administration in the Wall Street Reform Act to make all public colleges and universities tuition free, to ensure that the next generation has the skills necessary to be able to be the most effective person that they can be in the job market, in the labor force, and to ensure that our next generation uh, and the generation after it and the generations succeeding it, on and on and on, are the generations leading the world in development, innovation, uh, and research and development. America can be the leader in the world, and unfortunately, right now we are not. And the first step in becoming the leader once again in education is ensuring that all Americans have the right to a higher education, have the right to go to a trade school, and be the most effective person that they can be in the labor force. So, um, yeah,
So
let's get it
I'd
done.
just like to clarify this. You're saying that they should have the right to free education, post-secondary?
Correct.
Okay. Um, okay. I'm gonna respond to the abortion thing very quickly, but um, I support the 20-week ban. That is, personally, I am pro-choice. I've always been pro-choice. Um, however, I understood what the current law was, or the former law, I guess, was the 20-week ban. I believed that the issue was settled law. It was reopened, and we seen it was lowered to 12. I think that it's a slippery slope personally, but as president, I respect the work of the legislative branch. I don't intend to reopen it because I think that I'd be a hypocrite if I said that I wanted to reopen it. Because when it was 20 weeks, I said that the issue was settled law, and now it got reopened, which was I was against. But now once again it's settled law. So just because I don't agree with what it is, I don't think that I can reasonably say that I'm going to reopen this issue, because then I'd just be a hypocrite, and I don't think that I am one. But with regards to the education thing, I'll just say, I'll be the first one to say, I used to be someone who believed in free post-secondary education, but I think that um, it's just something, unfortunately, that isn't feasible at this time. And I think that there are better ways to go about this, such as the Baby Bonds Act, expanding that. That would give you uh, almost $48,000 if you qualified for it every year. And depending on how we expand it, if we up that, it could be even more by the time that you reach the age of 18. So I think that there are more reasonable ways to do this instead of just saying that it's free for everyone. And also the issue of someone who can afford it, they're getting off scot free. So it comes to the issue of should the top 1% uh, should the top 1% get it for free? Should the top 5% get it for or should the top 5% get it for free? What should happen with that? I just think that it's too slippery a slope. I think that there are better ways to go about it, but I respectfully disagree with Senator Sanders on that issue.
Okay, well let's break it down a little bit. Um, well, that last point you brought up, the slippery slope, that's the same point that was brought up about programs, or other universal programs like Medicare, like Social Security. These programs are always have been like that has been one of the main
Ugh.
criticisms. Well, what if there's been a slippery slope? We need to be universal systems are more universally appreciated, and when you create a system that affects only a certain portion of the population and leaves out some, it creates a disdain and it creates an opportunity for the media to.
So so
Whoa,
any
whoa,
tax cut. So how
whoa,
about this? Any tax.
whoa, whoa, whoa! Hold on. um, it creates an opportunity for the media to use that and divide the country up, and then ultimately destroy what was intended to be a good program by providing the poor with a certain program, or the rich with this program, or so on and so forth. But universal programs are more universally liked, and then you get into the issue of it's a simpler program. It costs relatively little compared to what we spend on other um, more useless projects than education and educating our workforce. And it's also working in other countries. It's working in countries that in countries that have moved towards a college for all system, where public colleges and universities and trade schools are free. Uh, their labor force and their workforce is more educated, more skilled, and more innovative and creative, and working towards research and development for their society. And the fact is, we need to be moving in that same direction. It's really cheap for the American government to pursue. We have the funds, the tax is already in place, and now it's just up to us to pass the law that makes colleges and universities tuition free. Uh, Quite simple, quite simple process, and every student, every adult, every person wanting to change their career would now have that opportunity to do that. All they would need is the educational requirements.
Um, so I apologize for interrupting you there, but I just wanted to bring up a point. You said that you don't think that, just clarify me if I'm incorrect here. Um, you don't think that the poor should get that's your words, the poor should get something that the rich don't.
That's not my words. I'm saying universally. Universal programs are more universally accepted, and when you pursue a program that would be as large as providing college for free to a certain portion of the population and leaving out others. It would create the opportunity for the media to distort that and create disdain for that project, leaving it constantly attacked, like programs like welfare, like programs like Medicaid, and you can go on down the line of all programs that are directly aimed at poor people. Um, these programs get constantly attacked because they're not universal programs. It's not.
Okay, I'll say okay. So that's fair enough, but I'd respond to that. The Baby Bonds Act applied to anybody who earns less than $30,000 a year. So that's something that anybody can apply for as long as you're under $30,000 a year in household income. So that passed with nearly unanimous consent. So respectfully,
Well,
that
it's
is that's
anecdotal
just
compared to the mountains of evidence that suggests that political theory that I have explained, I think, twice now, is fact in American society and societies across this country, across the world.
um, I respectfully disagree. I think that history and Mac, when you look at bills that have passed, such as the BBA, I could run, we could run through a whole list, but that apply to someone who is less well off compared to someone who is uh, more well off. If it applies to the someone who is less well off and not someone who is more well off, rather, um, we've seen pretty unanimous support um, in MEC. That's the thing. We're talking about mock election community. So, with regards to that, I would disagree with your point.
Well,
But I personally, here's the thing. I do not think that it is a good idea. You obviously, I could spend all day, all week. I could spend the rest of my days trying to convince you of this, and you are not going to budge because you are set in your beliefs, and I am set in mine. So I will respectfully agree to disagree with you. But I am not getting something explained to me, so I don't. I You can explain that theory to me all you want. It doesn't change the fact of what has happened throughout MEC. That rarely, if ever, happens with regards to uh, in actual practice throughout things that have happened and passed the chambers in mock election.
cool. Well, I'll just say on a final note, if we're talking about mock election, then it would be even easier to go to a universal education program because we have even more revenue than we do in real life, and we also have a surplus of way more than we have in real life. So it makes even more sense in mock election to move towards a universal education program. I get that I'm not going to change your beliefs and you're not going to change mine. I mean, that's not the point of this debate. The point of this debate is to bring up our policies and explain our policies to the American people. But I guess we can move on to the next question.
I'm just gonna let that one slide, but anyways, regardless, let's go.
Yes, we can. Okay, this question goes to both of the candidates. Over the past year, income inequality has slowly retracted and wage growth has, for most Americans, has steadily increased. However, this has fueled concerns, particularly among more right-leaning economists, of hyperinflation and perhaps a return to the stagflation of the late 1970s. What is your approach to addressing inflation and reducing these concerns?
Do I
Well,
start that or does?
my
Okay, go
approach
ahead.
to
He started last time.
well, I guess Mr. McKay can go then. I guess.
Robert.
Who? Okay, wait. Who's going? Am I
Uh,
going or
yeah.
I'm going? Okay,
Ben.
good. Um, all right. So your question, could you just repeat the end of it? Sorry, I didn't get that last part. I heard
What is your
with
approach to addressing inflation and reducing these concerns?
right. So we talked earlier about the minimum wage and how that affects um, uh, inflation and how it has throughout history. Some uh, economic theor- economic theorists disagree with that, but I think that history has proven that those theories are wrong. What I would say with regards to how to address uh, inflation would be so, firstly, tight fiscal policy would be up there. Um, I'm someone who's pretty fiscally conservative on most things, unless I think that something is absolutely necessary, or if a bill came through without budgetary offsets or without um, explaining how they're going to pay for it, or whether it had coming from the surplus or coming from this part of the budget. If it didn't have that, I'd just vote nay or I'd abstain because it wasn't worth the time of day, frankly. So I would uh, just say the higher income tax uh, and, and lower government spending would reduce inflation. It would pull it down. So that would be one approach that we could take. But I don't think that I don't think that uh, when we talk about inflation, or let me rephrase that. So in the U.S., monetary policy is, one of the more important tools uh, to maintain low inflation. I think that if we don't, uh, if we start letting that get away from us, I guess would be how I'm trying to say this. I'm trying to think of the words to say this. If we start letting that get away from us and start putting that down by the wayside and not addressing monetary policy that we have, I think that that is something that we're going to see uh, happening. I think that we're going to see um, the base rates and inflation start going out of whack, like you said earlier, in the 70s and 80s. You've seen uh, that kind of happening, and in the late 80s and the 90s, try to control the rise of inflation, uh, and the base rates obviously had something to do with that as well. Um, but also, as I said earlier, fiscal policy. Uh, it's important to make sure that it's similar in effect to monetary policy. Um, Fiscal policy, so it would basically, I'm talking about changing the tax and spending levels in order to, uh, I'm trying to think of the word, influence, I guess, the level of uh, demand. Basically, would be how to say this. Um, this is something that I think uh, a lot of people don't take into effect. Especially with the minimum wage as well. I'd just like to tie it back to that. If someone talks about raising the minimum wage to $15 right away, and it's at $12 or it's at $13.50, and without a gradual increase, then you don't tie it to inflation, then you're obviously going to see the effects of that. That's probably the most common uh, uh, example that we would have in debates and in issues that we're going to see uh, in today's America that people are going to understand in this debate. But yeah, with regards to uh, inflation, I think that it's important, first off, as I said, to control fiscal policy, to control monetary policy, and make sure that that is consistent, and also to make sure that the minimum wage is consistent. It's not fluctuating. And that if you do move it, that it is tied to inflation. So yes.
Okay. Robert Samuel.
Well, I'd mostly agree with what Mr. McKay said. I mean, as president in my previous administration, we raised interest rates to 5.5% to counteract the inflation and growing economic concern. Um, we would continue to do economic or continue to run our monetary policy like that, and I would appoint a Secretary of the Treasury who is well versed in monetary and fiscal policy. So I would have that advisor right at my right hand side if an economic concern came, or if economic concern arose. Um, but what we can do to try and counteract this is what I've said in other answers. We can boost our labor force, protect our our social safety net, and ensure that um, workers are helping make the decisions in the businesses that they are creating the value for. Um, when we have for when we have people who are simply uh, driving for a profit and not trying to protect their livelihood, then you create illegal actions like that, illegal activity that lead to crises like the 2008 um, Wall Street recession. And what we have to do to counteract efforts like that is move towards workplace democracy, move towards Wall Street reform, and uh, expand on the work done by President Evans, um, pass co-determination, and get workers on corporate boards. This is how we can protect not only our economy, not only the market, but the livelihood of workers and their quality of life. We can improve the standard of living of our people. We can improve the standard of living uh, of our workers, and we can improve the quality of our economy by making sure that workers are protected in it, or workers that create the value for it are protected. Uh, this type of economic policy is how we can move towards a 21st century economy where we have little to no recessions. And as president, if elected, uh, I will be pushing extremely hard for this, and it will be on the top of my priorities as president.
Okay, now we're moving on to closing statements. Former President Sanders, you can go first. You have 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Raimundo, we can't really hear you.
Oh, we're moving on to the closing statements. Robert, you have 1 minute and 30 seconds. You're going first.
Sorry, I have to go get some water. Can I go second?
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Ben, you have 1 minute and 30 seconds for your closing statement.
What was that? Sorry, you broke up.
You have 1 minute and 30 seconds for your closing statement.
Okay. Well, I want to thank the moderators for asking their questions. I want to thank Robert for participating in tonight's debate. Although we disagree on many issues, I think that both of us agree that it should be a top priority to ensure the progress of our great nation. I want to thank the American people for their voices and their words of encouragement and the advice that has made all of this worth it. This election poses a choice for us as a people, a choice between two Americas. An America in which we are plagued with the same old tired politics, or a new style and brand of leadership. For too long, when an election comes around, politicians come to visit forgotten Americans across our land and make promise after promise, only to get elected and never deliver. Well, I have been fighting for forgotten Americans my entire career. Ever since I first joined MEC, I have been fighting for the ideals and the principles that our nation was founded on: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I will bring experience and a new perspective that we are in such desperate need of. America is the land of opportunity, but for too long, forgotten men and women of our nation have not been given the opportunities that they deserve. America, it is time to have an administration that governs based on its promises, that believes that its word is its bond. A Mackay administration will be that administration. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
Robert Sanders,
Is that
your
finished?
closing
Oh.
statement.
Well, thank you to the moderators. Thank you to Kenneth Quignon, Adam Evans, Raimundo Felix. Thank you to Mr. McKay for attending. Um, Thank you to the American people for listening, and thank you for this opportunity for me to opportunity to discuss the policies and plans that I believe in, however short that segment of this debate was. Um, what we need to be doing in this community, what we need to be doing in this election, is voting for a candidate that is pushing for real fundamental change, a candidate that has a platform, a candidate that has been campaigning, that has actually been campaigning, a candidate that has a plan to engage this community, to bring back activity through the form of governors, through the form of electoral reform and ranked choice voting, uh, through lobbying the mods and making Congress and the legislative branches of the mock election community more autonomous in the decisions made of the community. These are the huge reforms that we need passed to be able to engage the community, to be able to bring the fundamental change that every candidate and every president has talked about. In my last administration, we talked about changing the power structure. And what we see now is a completely changed power structure in this community. A power structure where Henry Terry, the most left wing person in this community, someone who has been ridiculed and made fun of for seasons, is now a top presidential contender for president of the United States. My last administration was extremely successful. We changed the power structure of this community. We ripped up the establishment, and in my next administration, we will fundamentally change this community. We will engage this community. We will bring it back from the dead, and we will create a new era of mech that is unlike anything that we have ever even seen or imagined. We will see one that has news alts that are posting not only drama to engage the community, but daily news about everything that happens in the community and everything that goes on within the country. Uh, we will have things to be proud of in this community. We will have things to campaign on. We will have close elections and parties that fight to the death to have control of government. This is my vision for the future. I hope that I have convinced you to join this movement. Let's fundamentally change this community. Let's win this election. Thank you all very much.
You know, Grover wasn't a joke when he was supporting you.
What?
Grover wasn't a joke, or he wasn't a joke candidate. He wasn't uh, somebody not to be taken seriously when he was supporting you, when he wasn't in the race. But
I
now
think
that
you
he's back,
misunderstood what I said. I've always supported and respected Mr. Terry. What I was saying is the community regarded him as a joke, and now he is regarded as one of the most
I don't
serious.
think so.
What? Go back into season 23 even.
Are they?
Go back into season 23 even. Grover was regarded as someone unserious and someone who would not take a job seriously. When he was made my trade representative, Grover was ridiculed and criticized every day. And that what I'm saying is now he is a serious candidate for president, and he has gained the respect in this community. What I'm
Yes,
saying
but
is that
that's not thanks to your. That's not thanks to you though. That's thanks to his hard work.
well, I'm not saying it's 100% me. What I'm saying is what we did in my administration was we ripped up the establishment, which changed the power structure in this community, which opened the path to allow him to be able to do that hard work and get ahead in his uh, recognition in the community. Same thing could be said for other members like Ashton Shabazz and Dave Terry. And you could keep going down the list of newly elected members of Congress. That change was started in the Sanders administration, continued in the Evans administration, and stagnated in the Taney administration. And the only opportunity we have now to continue that change and expand on it with the fundamental reforms that I have just outlined, is moving towards a Sanders administration. With that, the stream is over.